In late February 2004, the cold New Hampshire air pressed its fingers through the seams of every jacket and crept into bone. The forest edge beside Route 112 was coated in a light crust of new snow. In the yellow halo of a passing headlight, crystals danced and drifted. It was on such a night that 21-year-old Maura Murray drove toward what would become the darkest blank in her life. Maura was a student at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, studying nursing, but 2 weeks before the semester break she called her professors, saying her grandmother had died and she needed to visit home in Haverhill. She packed her car, small, silver, a Saturn, and slipped away without telling many friends. Fellow students later recalled she seemed nervous, distracted. Someone glimpsed her crying in the hallway, but nothing concrete. On February 9, 2004, around 7:30 p.m., she was seen at a convenience store in Stowe, Massachusetts, buying snacks. At another stop, she used a Western Union to wire some money. She filled her tank at a mobile station in Andover. Then she drove north through Vermont and into New Hampshire, toward the rural region where she would vanish. The plan, or at least her path, was measurable until it wasn't. In the early evening of February 9th, a sandwich shop in Woodsville recorded a suspicious credit card decline at a counter. Minutes later, a local man, curious about a broken-down car parked off-road, phoned in a report. He said the car, Maura's Saturn, was partly in the snowbank, partially on the shoulder. There was no one in sight. He estimated the time was between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m. That call was the first ripple in a pond that would never settle. When state police arrived, the car's door was open, the dome light on, and the vehicle empty. A few personal items, including her cell phone, fingernail clippers, and other small things, lay inside. But Maura herself was gone, into the darkness. From the outset, investigators treated it as a possible runaway. But the timeline was too tight. She had a loaded backpack, later recovered, cold weather, no water bottle in her car. She left in conditions inhospitable to simply vanish. The mountain roads around Haverhill Hollow were dark, winding, isolated, hard to navigate even in daylight. A few local search parties traipsed the forest in early morning hours. The wind murmured through bare birches. Frost lingered in hollows. But they found nothing. No footprints in snow beyond shallow tracks from the car. No sign of struggle. No blood. No clothing or discarded gear. It was as if Maura had dissolved into the night. For weeks afterward, the community clung to hope or to fear. Flyers went up across New England. Missing Maura Murray. Last seen February 9, 2004. Some believed she had staged the disappearance. Others suspected foul play from the beginning. The question haunted detectives. Did she wander off into the woods? Did she walk onto the road and get struck by a car? Did someone else drive up and take her? At its heart, the case had a lure. A young woman, educated, determined, with no obvious enemies, and yet a trail that split into cold ends. Over time, rumors multiplied. A few locals whispered of a late-night snowplow accident, of psychic visions, of illicit secrets, none of which ever held firm. In 2006, the police reclassified the case as a homicide investigation, despite no body or murder weapon. Over the years, dozens of tips arrived. Investigators chased leads across state lines, hired ground-penetrating radar, dug trenches, sampled soil, but the mystery refused to yield. Those who knew Maura described her as confident, athletic. She skied and rode motorcycles, somewhat reserved and fiercely private. She had written cryptically in her journal, "I need a break. I need to disappear." But was that foreshadowing or misdirection? So the night swallowed her, leaving behind a car in the snow, 2 decades of questions, and a story that would haunt New Hampshire forever. In the months that followed, hints appeared. A distant witness claimed to have seen someone pushing a car near that road at dusk. Another said they saw a figure walking away, toward the forest, hood pulled tight. More disturbingly, a few locals believed someone in the area knew more. Met strange phone calls, saw headlights in the woods. But none of those whispers turned into solid evidence. Meanwhile, Maura's parents, Fred and Marlon, refused to let the case die. They hired private investigators, prodded state officials, held memorials. They visited woodlands themselves, walked trails in snow, asked strangers on snowmobile roads. Each visit reopened fresh wounds. In interviews, they spoke of their daughter's kindness and her drive. She wasn't a loner or lost soul. She had goals. But she also had secrets, small, personal ones, notes about tension with her boyfriend, issues at school, moods of withdrawal. The public remained captivated. Podcasts, journalists, armchair detectives pored over maps and timelines. Some built theories. She had intentionally vanished to start over. She was abducted by someone locally. She got into a collision and was taken by a good Samaritan who offered help, but then left her somewhere. But all theories stumbled. No remains, no forensic trace, no verifiable sightings. Months bled into years. The cold roads remained unchanged. The forest grew thicker. The snow melted in summer. Leaves turned. Still no sign of Maura. The disappearance became one of New Hampshire's most enduring mysteries, one that refused to die. By the 10th year, cold cases rarely see movement. But in Maura's story, the threads continued to twitch. Around 2014, a tip from Massachusetts reopened lines. A woman phoned, claiming she had encountered a man in Vermont who mentioned a girl in a car crash in the woods around 2004. The man supposedly said he had helped transport the injured and then buried her after she died. The memory was vague, the accents indistinct. Investigators followed the thread. They traced the tip to a region near the Canadian border, interviewed the man, now elderly, but he denied any involvement. He admitted he had transported a woman who was badly hurt after an alleged crash, but insisted it was unrelated to Maura. Records did not support his account. In 2017, a tape surfaced, an unedited 911 call from the night Maura disappeared. The caller reported the stalled car on Route 112, but the dispatcher's tone and hesitations raised questions. The call ended before paramedics arrived. Some believed parts had been erased or faded. Audio forensic specialists dove into frequencies, background hiss, radio static. They claimed to detect a second voice, soft, distant, though it was nowhere in the transcript. Was it overinterpretation or something real? No conclusion solidified. Then, just last year, there was renewed interest in a tree line near Haverhill Hollow. A group of volunteer searchers used ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. On one ridge, they found anomalous soil patterns, patches where soil seemed disturbed, layers inconsistent with natural stratification. But when they dug, they found nothing. The spot transformed into another grave of possibilities. Across the years, more witness statements emerged, some conflicting. One late-night traveler said she passed a Subaru off the road, doors open. Someone crouched nearby. She glanced at the license plate. A digit flickered in her memory, but she couldn't be certain. Another woman, decades ago, claimed her ex-boyfriend had taken her near the spot and, in passing, said, "I know where that girl went." She attempted to recall that ex's name, but time drained clarity. Amid that swirl, private investigators zeroed in on a name. A local man in Haverhill, quiet, reclusive, who once worked road maintenance and had access to snow and heavy equipment. Rumors said he had been near that stretch of highway on the night. Some locals remembered seeing his plow truck later than usual, lingering near that road. Others claimed he spoke in guarded riddles. You don't want to stay long in the woods. But proving anything proved impossible. No record placed him right there that night. His alibi slipped through cracks. No DNA, no physical connection. Some investigators believed he may have disturbed scenes, buried or moved remains. Others thought he's a distraction, a red herring introduced by rumor. To the public, the case took on life of its own. Blogs dissected every cell phone ping, every credit card swipe, every witness sketch. Reddit threads overran maps. Amateur investigators compiled timelines, using reconstructed phone towers, putting Maura's path on animated maps. They flagged inconsistencies. Why was her cell phone turned off shortly before the car was seen? Why was there a credit card transaction in Woodsville just before the crash? Could the card swipe have been forced or automated? In one podcast interview, a detective said, If you have no body, you have no victim. You have hypotheses, but no conclusion. That was the bitter truth. Over time, many theories lost plausibility, but some glimmers held on. One theory grew increasingly tested. Maura was hit by another car when she stepped into the road. The driver, panicked, stopped, got out, saw her unconscious or worse, then tried to conceal their involvement. That would account for the absence of footprints. The body was moved. But how did they dispose of her? Where? No grave, no river dump, no remains found. The driver would have had to cover every trail. Years later, in 2020, the state police released files with new emphasis on the auto collision theory. They asked for eyewitnesses who had traveled that stretch between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. They invited the public to re-examine tire wear patterns or unreported damage on vehicles. They even requested photos from local garages from that era. Some people came forward. A retired local mechanic recalled seeing a late-model SUV driving in at odd hours, with fresh damage to the passenger side, brought in for bodywork, but he couldn't remember the date. Another man, in a bar, purportedly told friends that he once gave a ride to a woman matching Maura's description in Vermont, but then realized it was too late. He avoided the police. None of these came with solid proof. Meanwhile, Maura's own papers offered potential meaning. Her notebooks, recovered later, showed strain. Entries about uncertainty, anxiety, mention of something she feared discovering. Some speculate she had uncovered something, personal or external, and was planning to escape or confide in someone. But the content was small, isolated, and largely intelligible only to her. One curious detail. At one point she sent an email to a friend, "I'm so tired of the lies." She had had conflict with her boyfriend that semester. They argued about secrecy. But was that relevant? Many missing person cases have emotional context. Few have hard evidence. Through it all, the emotional weight grew. The Murray family aged with the case. Investigators passed it down. The local landscape stayed the same. The quiet curves, the pull of tree shadows, the lonely stretches of snow-crusted road. The mystery grew legendary, not in myth but as sorrow. A young life extinguished or hidden, and the world left to guess. And yet, even in this darkness, hope persisted. Hope that someone, somewhere, held the missing key. A scrap of memory, a photograph, a confession. Something that would break the silence. The thread still tugged, faint but unbroken, refusing to die. The more the case is examined, the more it fractures into conflicting light and dark, layers of possibility that none can fully reconcile. In the spring of 2025, a new lead resurfaced. A man in Pennsylvania, now dying of cancer, wrote a letter to the New Hampshire State Police. He claimed he had been a tow truck driver during the early 2000s and once hauled off a crashed Saturn off a rural stretch of road. No owner, no explanation. He handed over a rough location, dates, and some scrap paperwork. He asked them to investigate after his death if nothing turned up. Investigators pored over that tip. The man's documents were scarce. An old phone log, a company ledger, a slip of paper with a partial license plate. The coordinates he supplied pointed to a defunct logging access road around Haverhill. They sent teams with LiDAR, cadaver dogs, dowsing rods, some would say, and forensic geomapping. Again, they found disturbed soil, twig breaks, moss scarring, but no remains. One of the detectives, a veteran named Leah Morin, later said quietly, "I've worked 30-plus missing person cases. I can't remember one that haunted me like this one. Every time I think I rule something out, another fragment appears." Morin began to revisit all prior notes. She interviewed surviving witnesses again, some decades older now, with fading eyesight and shaky memories. One woman claimed she had seen a figure dragging something into a truck near that forest access road, around 9:45 p.m. Another recalled hearing muffled groans near a snowmobile trail. Morin reinterpreted earlier evidence. Footprints once discarded as animal tracks might align with a kneeling position. Depressions in snow near a brush pile suggested someone dropped a duffel. Meanwhile, an independent journalist named Sarah DuPont, who had been chronicling the case for years, received a package in the mail, a small bound journal, written in Maura's handwriting, torn from one of her notebooks. The cover was gone. Some pages were water-stained or smudged. The sender was anonymous. On one page in Maura's script was the line, "If I disappear, you will know something was wrong." On another, "I won't be found in the snow." DuPont compared handwriting samples and believed it authentic. She shared the finding with the Murray family and investigators. The pages suggested deliberate planning and a dread of being traced. But they also begged more questions. Did Maura fear someone? Was she trying to avoid being found? Or was this a trap she walked into? In late summer, Morin led a climactic expedition into hidden ravines and ridgelines. The team followed wire lines, used thermal scanning, and plotted triangulation points from prior witness statements. On one ridge, they uncovered a man-made shaft, collapsed, half filled with debris. The team cleared some brush and glimpsed metal edges, possibly a cover plate. Beneath it lay a narrow cavity just wide enough for a body, but the access was partially collapsed and inaccessible without heavy equipment. No remains emerged, but the shaft's existence was enough to focus renewed efforts. Around that same time, a retired corrections officer, speaking under the condition of anonymity, claimed that while working at a prison facility in Vermont in the late 2000s, he overheard two inmates talking. One said he had helped bury a girl from Massachusetts in a remote area. The other responded, "You pay for that disinterest. Those hills never let it go." When asked how he recognized the name, the inmate had responded, "Someone heard me. Someone watched me." The corrections officer took notes. He handed them confidentially to the Murray family attorney. Investigators considered whether to pursue it. The inmates' stories did not match precisely any known detail, and could be self-serving boasting, but at least the possibility existed of direct confessions. So by the autumn of 2025, multiple threads seemed to converge. The collapsed shaft, the journal fragment, the inmates' talk, the anonymous tip. But not one produced conclusive evidence. No bones, no DNA, no final confirmation of identity. The case still hinged on inference, not proof. Yet something had shifted. What once seemed like a random disappearance now leaned more heavily toward homicide or clandestine abduction. The unknown man in Haverhill with the plow, the shadow figure, didn't seem incidental. The road access roads, the murky repair shops, the altered soil, these now aligned like topographic clues. One evening, Leah Morin called the Murray family. In quiet tones she said, "I think Maura left the car intentionally." She sought help. Someone came. She got into a vehicle. That person or those people didn't intend to let her return. Fred Murray sobbed. Marlon shook. They had waited more than 20 years, hoping for return. She added, "We might never know where she rests, but we're closer to knowing how this happened." In that moment, the moral of the story began to unspool. Sometimes truth is not in finding remains. Sometimes it lies in never letting silence win. On a cold autumn night, as snow began to dust the same roads once traveled, DuPont posted a final video in her investigative series. She spoke in gentle tone, addressed viewers directly. Maura Murray disappeared in a forest road, and we have chased ghosts ever since. In that chase, we've seen the limits of memory, the failures of systems, the weight of unanswered questions. But we must keep looking, for the disappeared deserve more than oblivion. In the closing frames, she showed a photo of Maura smiling, by a lake, hair catching sun, and over it, the words, "Refuse to let her fade." What remains, after decades of searching, is not neat closure, but haunting truth. The past does not dissipate with time. The land retains memory. Even when a body is lost, the world shifts to accommodate its absence. In the holes of soil, under the leaf mold, in traces of disturbance, the earth knows a story. The disappearance of Maura Murray is more than a missing persons case. It is a testament to human imperfection, to how institutions fail, to how isolation and fear can erase presence. And yet, it is also a lesson in persistence. Families and investigators and communities must not abandon the missing to silence. If there is a moral, if there is a haunting truth, it is this: The greatest injustice is forgetting. Maura Murray may not be found, but her disappearance must never be allowed to fade into legend or myth. It demands that we keep asking, keep listening, keep unearthing even when the quarry is grief. For those who remain, the silence is not resting space. It is a challenge. We must not accept mystery as final. Even when answers elude us, we owe the vanished our presence. And so the road remains open, the forest still whispering questions. The mystery refuses to die, not because someone solved it, but because enough people refuse to let it be forgotten.